Quite a few years ago, long before my haunted restaurant days, I did in-home care for the county that I live in. That particular job entailed me traveling from one client's home to another, pretty much all day. I met the Peeping Tom of this story at my second client's apartment that day. He was introduced to me by my client as the maintenance man for the apartment complex that she lived in. He would just do basic handyman fix-it duties in the tenants' apartments as well as the yard work around the small complex. I say small complex because that apartment complex was only 2 stories tall and only had about 20 or so apartments in it. On the day that the maintenance man and I were introduced, everything seemed fine and normal. No red flags as of yet anyways. My client and I sat and talked with him over lunch, since she was a sweet person and he had come over on short notice to fix her leaking faucet. He told us a little about his wife and kids and how much they loved playing outdoors on his expansive property in their new side-by-side ATV. He even jokingly said that if I were ever near his neck of the woods that I should stop by and meet his family and take a ride on his side-by-side to tour his woodsy property with its beautiful views if I wanted. Fast forward to a few weeks later when I needed to hire him at my new house to do some emergency plumbing because my normal plumber was away on a vacation at that time. My client agreed that he would be a great fit for the job and plus he really needed the extra money, so she gave me his business card and I called him up to schedule him for the next morning. He showed up on time and did the work, although I found it to be honestly a little bit janky if I may say so. What he did worked, it was just that he didn't even bother to go get the right parts to make the plumbing permanent, so I ended up with sort of a long-term temporary fix. Everything was fine after he did the job, he left still showing no red flags or anything. Until later that month, that is when he began calling me for really weird reasons. Like, he would just want to know if I was working with that client the next day or whenever. He wanted to know that, because according to him he needed to do some work she had called him about, but he was unable to reach her on the phone. Weird I thought, especially since I thought he had worked in her apartment complex almost every weekday. So, why couldn't he just knock on her door or let the manager know? I brushed it off though, considering I had just moved into that house and I had a lot of work to do on it still to make it more livable and comfortable. But soon enough, the calls came more and more frequently over the next couple of weeks, until I woke up with 17 voicemails from him one morning. Enough was enough with that I decided right then, and so when I went to work for that client the next day, I showed her all of his voicemails. She was absolutely appalled at seeing them all and she immediately called the apartment's manager and informed them of the situation with the maintenance man and I. I would be lying if I said that it wasn't totally awkward after my client made that phone call, but unfortunately it was. At first, I was able to just simply ignore him and go on about my job duties as per usual. But I wouldn't be writing this if that's all there really was, now would I? The calls began to really amp up and eventually, they turned into incessant texts. Some of the texts were angry and some were almost sexual in nature. They were all still nonetheless, quite creepy indeed. To my great dismay though, I thought I was beginning to hear strange noises outside of my isolated house some nights. At first, I figured that it was just some local wildlife, which we got a lot of out in the country where I was. But since I happen to know a little bit of tracking, I got bored one late afternoon and decided to go out exploring and tracking a little. I was horrified to find several human, man-sized 13-inch outsole boot prints all around my house and field. I brought out my little tape measurer just to make sure, and sure enough, it looked as though someone had been traipsing around outside my house and outside my bedroom window. I just knew deep in my gut that that was all the strange sounds I had been hearing late at night outside. I went out to a local electronics store the very next day after I got off of work and purchased a motion-censored night vision game camera for still pictures and a small night vision live camera for outside that I could view on my TV. At first, unfortunately, the game camera didn't really come up with any good pictures except for some deer and a skunk. But, one night, as I sat in front of my TV, by myself, I decided to switch from the satellite dish to the live camera that I had placed outside a couple of days prior. I didn't see anything at all for the first few minutes, but that all quickly changed. I began to hear the faint and then familiar sounds of light footfalls outside. Then, to my absolute and complete and utter horror, I watched on my TV, as a man in a dark hoodie walked right past my camera. I instantly froze, not knowing what to do. I didn't dare move a muscle or even breathe as I listened to him creep past outside my window. In my mind, my heartbeat must have been audible to him as he slipped past outside. I don't know why I didn't call the cops right then and there, but I figured he was probably already gone since all had gone silent outside once again. It wasn't until about 2 weeks later when I returned home from work to find both my front security screen that I had locked standing open along with my previously locked front door open, that I was forced to call the police finally. They sent an officer out, but all he could really do was look at the footprints outside my bedroom window and take a report. Fortunately, the handyman was fired shortly after that due to unknown reasons to me, and all the weird activity outside my house at night stopped. If I learned even one thing from that whole scary experience, it was that you should always watch who you invite out to your house, especially if you're a single female.